Here we go. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to go here. Welcome. Hoping that I'm seeing people here and we're all sounding okay. Let me know if there's anyone there and make a comment. That would be great. And I'm just going to turn the volume down on my mic here a little. There we go. Hi, Rita. Nice to see you. And hi, Angelica. Great to see you. Thanks for joining. Today is an interesting program because one of the most exciting things that I've learned, I guess, over the years is knowing how to work with grays. So it's a big subject in some ways, and yet it seems so simple once you understand the premise. And I'm going to try and keep it simple and explain how I work with grays. It's funny when you think about painting because we're sort of limited in some ways to a red, yellow, and blue, and or maybe black and white. But there's so many reds and so many yellows and so many blues, and it's hard to know which one to pick up if you haven't done any study of color. It took me years and years to understand actually the colors we use are less important than the values that we're working with. And when I say values, I'm talking about how light and dark things are within your image. Of course, if we're looking at a black and white photograph, that's pretty easy. We can see everything in grays, and we know this area is darker and that area is lighter. So, hi Jerry, nice to see you. So we have things broken down for us if you look at things in black and white. But because we don't see in black and white unless we have some color blindness, and even people who are color blind usually can see some kind of color. Men, for example, tend to be more red-green color blind, and there are some women who actually see more colors than other women, and of course more than men, which is an anomaly, but it happens. So I think one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss the grays and how they work is because of a painting that I posted, and I'm just going to grab this here. And I think I'm going to flip the camera around here so that you can see this better. Let's go to the camera here. So I had posted this painting here as a time lapse and also as, finished painting on Facebook. Oh, hang on a second. There we go. All right, maybe that's better. So I had posted this, and I had such an amazing response on this, especially the time lapse, which has been seen over 2,200 times. It's unbelievable when I think about it. But there it is. It's one of the things with Facebook. You never know who's going to look and who's not. And I realize there's a certain, maybe a patience factor around this, because it's only 38 seconds long. So people are really happy to watch for 38 seconds and they don't fall asleep. And they can move on to the next posting that they see on Facebook. So, maybe we're just living in an age of impatience, or just maybe there's so much stimulation out there, so many things to see, that we just keep, looking and looking and wondering if there's something else that's more interesting. And of course, there are lots of interesting things to see on Facebook and all kinds of other things like Instagram. The thing is that when we do this, we don't, well, I can speak for myself. I can't speak for you. But we don't focus on one thing and understand it in order to sort of add it to our toolkit. So I'm hoping today that I can give you something that has really made a difference for me in my painting. And it's something that I really didn't understand until a few years ago. I just thought, you know what, if I want to have beautiful color, then I should get all my colors out and I should paint beautiful color, because that's what comes out of the tube. But the fact is that, well, just if you're sitting at home right now or wherever you are, if you look around the room or the space that you're in right now and see if you can find a pure primary color. And I'm just looking around right now and I see paintings where, I've painted some colors in that are fairly pure, but they're actually not right out of the tube colors. Maybe I see one, if there's an orange that was actually, which is, by the way, a mix of yellow and red. So it's, is it a pure primary color? Well, it's a pure orange. It's a secondary color. So we don't really see pure color very often. It's a funny thing, but we love getting our paints out and squeezing that fresh color out and trying to make something bright and more intense and something that will get attention. So how is it that some paintings really work with bright colors and others don't? And a couple of things to think about. Nature doesn't give us super pure colors, except for some very small areas. For example, if you walk into a field of flowers, wildflowers, the flowers in the distance aren't as intense as the ones that are in the foreground. So if I get on my knees and have a look at a flower, for example, I'll see probably the purest, most intense color somewhere within the flower. And if I look very carefully, maybe that's in the stamen or maybe that's in the petal. But if you look at petals on flowers, the colors that are on the petals even change from more intense to less intense. And it also depends on the light that's hitting. So why is it that we think that we can just put a whole bunch of pure color out on our palette and make really bright, beautiful paintings with all these pure colors? And I kind of like to use the example of a piano keyboard. If I sit down to a piano and I hit every key as loud as I can, well, a single key will get some attention. But if I put my hands down really hard, really fast, all at the same time, all those keys are getting hit at the same time with the same intensity, it sounds awful. It's terrible. It sounds, really jarring. It's the same thing with color. If I take all my reds and my yellows and my blues in their pure intensity and I put them on the same canvas, they're all fighting for attention. It's like, a classroom full of noisy kids. When they're all making a loud noise, it's really disturbing. If you want to hear someone speak, then the rest of the class has to be quiet so that we can hear the one person speak. And it's the same thing when it comes to painting. So grays to me are kind of like the quiet classroom, and it allows the viewer to look at the areas you want them to look at, which might have a little more intensity of color. I'm going to say a couple of things that seem sort of outrageous. Every color that we look at is a primary color. Every color that we look at is a gray leaning towards a primary color. And some of them actually make it to a primary color. When it comes out of the tube, it's a primary color. But when we're looking at nature, we're looking at the things around us. There are things that interfere with color. For example, the kind of light that we have. If we have a cool light, that affects all of the colors that we're looking at. If we have a warm light, that affects all the colors we're looking at. And essentially, any color that is not a primary color has been grayed or altered in some way. So If we start with grays, if we start with grayed color, let's say, and we build our painting out of grays and add a little bit of color in at the end, more intense color, more chroma, as we would say, we're really going to look at that color. We're going to notice it. And we can do this very subtly and very beautifully. Skin color, for example, when we look at skin, it's kind of like it's a mix of red, yellow, and a blue. That's what it is with white. So we're happy enough to look at people. And if someone puts a little bit too much makeup on, it looks kind of strange because it doesn't look natural. Now, of course, we can make a statement with makeup, but if you're trying to just accent areas, you don't take a bright red and stick it on your cheeks. All you have to do is go into a makeup department in any department store, and you'll see they have literally thousands of different subtle colors that enhance our skin. So it's just really something to think about. The grays are the things that set off all the other things that we want people to look at, or those small focal areas that we want people to look at. So today I'm going to show you how this works. Great to see you guys, Jayton, all the way from India. Nice to see you here. Anyone who's tuning in from some faraway place, I'm in Toronto, so far away, well, that can be Vancouver for us, or that could be even the East Coast. But anyone who wants to just let us know where you're tuning in from, really appreciate it, because it sort of gives me a sense, and the others here a sense of how we can connect with each other all around the world right now. I think it's just a fantastic thing. And perhaps this COVID thing has opened up some real possibilities this way. All right. So you can see on your screen, hopefully this is what you can see. You'll see two different images here. The one on the left, and I'm just going to highlight this. There we go. So the one on the left is a mix of lots of grays, and these are actually leftover colors from my palette. I threw some white in and I just muted it all down, so kind of a mushy color. But it's cooler. So you can see that it has more blues, more sort of cool greens. There's a tiny touch of pink in the center. The pink has white in it. As soon as you add white to any color, it lightens it and it cools it at the same time. So that's something to think about. If your light situation, if you have cool light, then you end up with relatively, and I say relatively, warmer shadow. So the darker areas in that situation are going to be a little bit warmer. If you have warm light, then your shadow areas are going to be relatively cooler. So there are a couple of different ways to do a painting and keep a color harmony. The one on the left here that you're looking at, because this is a cool background, and there are lots of blues in here, if I have warm light hitting in the areas that I want to paint, then the shadows naturally are going to set up for a cool. But you'll see I don't really have a lot of darks in here, so my shadow areas I'm going to have to manufacture. In this painting, so I'm going to try and do two different paintings for you, same subject, put two different paintings. This is a much warmer background. You can see that this has sort of a reds and a touch of yellow through here, and again there's a bit of pink, but this is a warmer overall color. Hopefully you can see that, and it should be more obvious as we get into painting. If I have cool light hitting a warm background or warm shadow area, that sets it up like the way we see in nature. And I always like to use the example when it comes to warm and cool, it's always relative. So if I were to walk up to a refrigerator, for example, and open the freezer door, and I put my hands up to the door, up to that open door, The palms of my hands will feel cool, but the back of my hands are going to feel relatively warm. And I say relatively. If I keep my hands there long enough, the back of my hands will probably cool down as well. But I'm getting that cool sensation coming from my hands facing the freezer as it's open. If I turn my hands around, so the back of my hands are facing the cold air coming from that freezer, then my palms of my hands are going to feel relatively warmer. And to push this point a little further, if I were to do the same thing with a fire outside, and if I put my hands, the palms of my hands towards the fire, the back of my hands are going to feel relatively cooler. So this is the same thing that happens with light. If you have, a warm sunset, that warm light, the yellows and oranges that come from that sunset, hitting a scene, you're going to end up with all the areas that are in the light being affected by that light source. And any of the areas that are not affected by that light source, that are in shadow, are going to look relatively cooler and darker, of course. So when we talk about grays, we can really set up a feeling of what we want fairly quickly if we keep that formula in mind. I'm going to show you the image that I'll be working from. This is actually a photograph that a friend of mine sent me, Jim Colville. I want to thank you for sending a great photo. I've taken this into a program called Procreate, and I've doctored it. There was a great big stump on the right-hand side, and this stream didn't go into the background, but I've played with it just a little bit to give myself a better composition and work with these kind of colors. And I'd like to recreate this two different ways. So I'm going to get into painting this now, so you don't all run away. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask. I'll check my comments now and then, and hopefully I can answer questions as I go. Welcome, Rita, watching from Germany. It's great to see anyone here who has taken the time to drop by. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is just grab a brush and a palette knife, and actually a couple of brushes here, and I'll just start getting into this. Now I have pre-mixed some grays. I'll show you what I've done. Here we go. So on the top, I have the warmer gray palette. So you can see it's warmer. All those grays are warmer, and the ones on the bottom are cooler. The warmer grays, what I did was I'm going to show you something else here, which is really neat. This is a paint that I like to work with. I've sort of discovered recently. I've heard someone talk about it, but this is Rublev, and this is Italian green umber. They actually make a bunch of different umber colors, and I really like the paint. It has a nice texture, a nice quality. It gets a little oily sometimes. When I say that, I mean it's oil paint, but the oil collects a little close to the lid. So I push this out onto a paper towel and let the oil soak out of it a bit, so it's not quite so greasy. And this is what I start with. And actually, all your umbers, pretty much all your umbers, are gray of some kind, either leaning towards a little warmth or a little cool. But this, I'm just using an umber because I have one, and I recommend it. Try the umbers; they're very pleasant to work with. If you don't have umbers, you can use a black, ivory black, which is quite cool. There's a lot of blue in ivory black, and you can mix your grays from that. So what I did was I took that Rublev and I put some warmth into it. And the warmth that I put into it here, you'll see, is transparent oxide red. That's what that is. And on my warm palette, I've got cadmium yellow, and I've got phthalo blue. And so cadmium yellow and phthalo blue, these are actually, all of those three colors are warm. Relative to the other colors that I have here, down here for the cooler palette, I have yellow ochre, which is a cool color. That's a whole discussion in itself, but it is cool. It's warmer than what you see here, but it's cool compared to cadmium yellow. I've got alizarin crimson there, and I've got cobalt blue. I always say to my students jokingly that it's easy to remember your cool blue, cobalt blue, because I call it cobalt blue. It's just a play on the word, so forgive me. All right, so you can see I've mixed up, well, I have a dark, a medium dark, a medium light, and a quite a light light. And I don't have white down here at all. So maybe at the end I might use a bit, but if I do use a white, I want to bring some color into it, because we don't see pure white in nature, or really when we're painting anything. And the reason for that is because, well, the color of the light affects white. So if you have, you know, sunlight, which is warm, hitting a white, then there's going to be a bit of that warmth in the light surface. If you have a cool light hitting that white, which might be from the north, let's say, then you're going to have a little bit of blue in your whites. All right, so let's get to this. I'm going to try and do this sort of one at a time. I'll start with the one on the left, and I'm going to go from dark to light. It's kind of the traditional way of working. And I'm going to go into my darkest areas here. And again, I'm just going to show you what I'm working from, so that gives you an idea. And I don't know if I can set this up so that they're side by side. That would be nice. Well, you don't want to see me. I'm still getting used to this. Yeah, I don't think this is going to work so well. So I'm just going to do this here so you can see what I'm doing properly. All right. So I'm going to go into my darks first. And I'm just going to, by the way, you can work fairly thin with your darks. And because I have a cool background, what I want to do is I want to work with my warm palette. So I know that if I have cool shadows, that means I'm going to have warm light. So I'm actually going to go in very thin. In a second, I just got to mix something here. All right. So I'm going to take a little bit of my cool shadow, which is from the palette of the cool grays, and I'm just going to scrub that in very lightly. And when I say lightly, you can actually see some of the texture coming through from the canvas that's underneath here. I really like that because it kind of just gives me, it looks like I've done a lot of painting, and I haven't really. So this is just a nice way of quickly establishing my values, which again are more important than anything, is to get my values working. Nice to see you, Barrett. And Moni, nice to see you. And I do like letting colors show through. By the way, when I work this way, if you've been watching my past live streams, you'll see that I do really like to let some of the textures that from underneath pop through. You get all these nice little surprises. Okay, my darkest darks are definitely in this area here. I can hit them a little harder. And as it goes back, as we go back, by the way, in a scene like this, our darks are dark, but they become relatively lighter because of atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective is interesting. It just means that, there's more particulate in the air, and we can get this sense of distance very quickly when we lighten our values as we go into the background. I'm going to take the next gray that I have on, and again, this is on the cool side, and I'm just going to pop these trees in here. It's going to take a mix of that dark and the next gray, and just pop these trees in here. So remember, I'm going with warm light, cool shadows. So I'm using my cool grays to set this up. I'm really trying to squint down and really see what's going on with the trees back here as far as simple shapes go. I don't want to get too complicated with my shapes. I just want to keep simple values going. Look at where my darks are. And in the distance, I've got some light coming through the trees. So I want to make sure that I keep my shape so that there's some room for light. I love the way these textures just pick up off the broken color that's already on the canvas, I think, or on the board. I'm painting on a board that has been covered with old leftover paint. Okay. And really what I want to go for is the spirit of this, the feeling of this scene. You know, using your reference is fine, but don't be a slave to your reference. We're not trying to copy a photo. We're trying to make a painting. So that's something I know it sort of takes a while to get used to. If we were doing a portrait, then of course we want to be a lot more accurate. We want to, you know, recognize the person, hopefully. But when you're painting nature, it's a little more forgiving. So we have a chance to really build the painting that we want, the scene we wish we could walk into. Let's put it that way. All right. Now you're getting a bit of glare over there. I'm going to just try moving my light a little bit and see, or turning it down a touch to see if that helps. I don't know if it will. Well, maybe it does a bit. Now I'm kind of painting in the dark. Maybe that's good because I do my best paintings in the dark. All right. So I've established, you know, sort of my larger, darker values. Now I want to go into the snow area. And again, if my light is hitting the snow, well, within the snow areas, there are also going to be some shadow areas. So I'm going to put them in. It's kind of hard to tell in this painting where my light source is coming from. It's kind of from above. And some of the shadowing picks up on the edges of the snow in these areas. So, and this isn't going to look anything like a shadow until I start putting some lights up against it. But that's just part of the building process. Case in point, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to now go to my warm light gray, and I'm just going to put some of that in here. That'll give you a sense of the kind of light that we could be looking at. And it's not a bad idea to kind of set that up ahead of time so you have a good sense of the range of colors that you're going to be working with, or values that you're going to be working with in the beginning. It doesn't hurt. All right, so this is, and this goes fairly quickly, you know, this is not rocket science. Painting is only magic when you kind of know what you want to do and it actually gets to where you want it to go. That's when it's magic. So, all right, and as I go into the distance a bit, here I want to create a sense of some of these shadow areas back in behind as it falls in underneath the trees back here. Okay, kind of peeks in behind these trees in here. And I can always go in, I'm not painting that thickly right now. I can always go back in and, address a few details where I need to. When I look at the water, now this is kind of interesting. When I look at the water in here, it's definitely darker than the shadows of the snow, but it's lighter than the very darkest darks that I have here. So this is a point where I could really, I can do this with grays, or I can reach into my palette and pull out a color, and you'll see what happens when I do this. I'm just going to take the smallest amount of phthalo and bring it in here. And when I say smallest amount, like phthalo is one of those killer colors. This is phthalo is a warm blue. Okay, so there's a lot of green in it. But phthalo is also like a super killer color. It wrecks your brushes very nicely because it stains. It's very strong. And I often will work with manganese blue because it's less intense. It doesn't kill my brushes as much. And you can see how that warm color, that warm blue, pulls this into the foreground. And I can warm it up even more. I'm going to bring the tiniest amount of cadmium yellow. Now I know we're talking about grays, like that's what this program is about, but all of these colors have gray in them. So now I'm leaning more towards the primary, but not even close to the primary color that comes out of the tube, just so you know. I'm going to take some warm light gray and just punch a little bit of an accent through here. I'm going to take the eye back into this area. Okay. And at this point, I'm just really trying to get a sense of this little stream that comes through the snow. Looking at my edges. So, sharp edges get our attention, right? And soft edges, they just kind of melt and let your eye pass by. You see, I'm just using broken color here. I'm just going over this very softly and allowing the texture that's underneath here, pull this together. All right. Okay. Now I want to go into those warm grays that are in the light area a little more. Let's just get some of that going. And let's see if we can make this work. Now in the original scene, the snow is a little smoother, but I don't mind seeing some of this texture. This happens when you're outdoors. I do like using the palette knife because this is an opportunity to pick up some of the texture that comes from the board. It feels a little more natural. It's really fun to paint this way because you very quickly get a feeling, a sense of depth and distance and color harmony. Because I'm working with grays, I have a lot of colors shouting out and saying, look at me, I've just got grays, and nature is just full of grays. So this time of year where you see snow in some parts of the world anyhow, it's really great to see the colors that suddenly appear. Some cases, foliage that didn't make it to the ground. Brown leaves suddenly look very colorful. And you'll find, some of the sumac trees and some of the twigs and grasses look so red, and it's beautiful, really. Love this time of year because it forces us to look at color we wouldn't see normally. Okay, I'm going to pull this into the foreground, soften a few things out here. And as you can see, this goes pretty quickly. It's not, like I say, it's not rocket science. This is just letting the brush and the texture do the work here. This one over here will be a little different. It's a much smoother background. I don't have all the leftover paint on that, so it'll be interesting to see that effect. In fact, it's tougher to paint on because you don't have these sort of natural mistakes, if you want, or things that just seem to accent it properly. Now our eye is drawn to light. So if you want someone's eye to follow a path, you can take the light in the way you want them to look. I have to think, when I look at Tom Thompson's work, of the famous Canadian painter, that he pre-mixed his colors. He's got a beautiful harmony in his colors. And he has lots of grays going on, and some areas are just so subtle. And then he'll just pop a little strong color somewhere, and that takes your eye to that area. Now, snow is a little softer as it comes to the edge here. I'm just going to smooth this down a bit. It feels a little more cohesive. You see, I'm not going crazy here. I'm letting the paint do its work. There's a little blob of white floating in the middle of the water right there. And already you can see how this is starting to take form. Now this is going to be fun. I'm going to take, there's a warm light that's actually hitting up in this area right in here. Well, against some foliage that's in the background. There's also some cool blue sky. So again, we've got, cool light, warm shadows. Warm light, cool shadows. So what I want to have is a little bit of warmth, and I'm going to take a cadmium yellow. And when you see this, you'll see what I'm talking about when you just have a bit of accent of color. I'm not taking a pure cad yellow because it would be too powerful. And maybe I should put it in just to show you, but this is actually cad yellow with a little bit of white in it, so that cools it a little bit. And it just hits some trees that are in behind here. All right. And I'm going to take the very light gray that I have, which will give me an accent in the sky and behind here. Now, typically I would work from background to foreground when it comes to these things because, painting over things is easier than painting around things. But sometimes when you get these sort of little windows of light that come through the trees, I like using the palette knife in a place like this. It puts nice clean color down, and you have a sense of the light that's finding its way down through the trees. So this is the part of the program where watching paint dry applies, because I don't talk all the time. I do not a bad job, but I try to focus a little bit when I have to. This is starting to feel a little bit like I want. Maybe a little bit of light peeking through in a couple of spots through here. Let that area be darker. That's okay. And I'm also going to go to a warmer gray. This is a case where, you can play back and forth between your warm and cool grays. I'm going to go to a warmer gray and just put a little bit of that into these areas and behind. And I need very little of that just to give another dimension to this, another sense of depth. And by lightening that value just a little bit, it puts it into the distance as well. In fact, what I'll do is just maybe let that tree there be a bit of a focal area. And this is just playing with atmospheric effects. We see this in nature. We're looking at things, we look at big shapes. I'm going to go back to my cool grays. I notice that, in fact, in the background, the snow comes up and down in a few areas. It's not just a straight line across. So I want to create a sense of more story back here. There's a way I can get into the distance. And when you're working with grays and they're harmonious, you can really get a feel for whatever you want. Really, you can make your own story up here. I feel like, well, maybe I can get around that tree. And it has a trunk. So I'm going to go in underneath here and just paint up a little around that. And I can go back in and accent the trunk if I need to. All right. Okay. This is a case where just because intuitively it feels right, I'm going to grab some, I haven't mentioned Viridian, but Viridian's one of those nice green colors that you can push towards warm or cool. And I'm going to take Viridian, I'm going to gray it down with a little bit of a warm gray, and just put a little bit of that green in here so that we got the sense of some foliage here. And I'm even going to bring in a bit of transparent oxide over here. So you can see the majority of my color is gray, but now what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, you know what? There's something going on over here that has a little bit of color. I'm not colorless. And I don't want to take this too far. I think, there's always a danger when you do these things of just saying, okay, now a happy branch here and a happy branch there, and it's before you know it, you're in Bob Ross land. So I don't want to do that. So I'm just gonna couple little accents there. So there's a sense of more focal area against that warm color that we see. Let's take that tree right out of the painting there. These four shapes are too similar to each other. So whenever you have that happen, like make ones bigger, smaller, eliminate something, because we're interested in things that are asymmetric. So I'm going to literally get rid of that there. I'll go in with a darker gray in that area. And it just becomes kind of a mush of something. And you can see that area is a little more interesting now.
And I want to break it up so that I don't have too much of one shape like creating a pattern, if that makes any sense. I go a little darker back in here. And because I'm working with grays, you can see there's an automatic harmony with all of this stuff. We don't get too hung up on trying to get all the right exact colors when you're working with grays. Okay. All right, where are we? 246. Okay, not bad. I'm going to go into my manganese blue, and I mentioned that I really like the manganese because it's less intense. No, I don't have that in the palette that I showed you. I have a secondary palette going over here for some supplementary color when I need it. But this painting is pretty much grays. There's a bit of warmth there, a little cooler here. Now I'm going to go in with my manganese, and manganese and white, by the way, that's what this is. And just drop some of this color in so that this painting has a little bit more life to it. A few brush strokes of color, like you really don't need a ton of color. And I'm going to go back into my phthalo, so I've got some depth here. Again, this takes your eye in. And I'm going to go back in and just accent a couple of areas that I want to be a little bit darker. One of the things when you're painting, just as a side note, your brush should follow the action. Like if you've got, a stream that's happening, well, let your brush follow the stream up and imitate the movement that you see. And that adds a little bit more life. Even though this may be very still, this scene, it helps take the viewer's eye back. And let's just drop in a couple of more accents in this area. I want to get a dark up against that little blob that's in the foreground. This one's looking a little obvious. Soften that down a bit and put a dark up against this little spot of light that's sitting in the ice or water, whatever this is. It's sort of melting this scene, so. And I noticed that there's a bit of warmth that comes into the water. It's kind of almost like a reflection of what's happening up in here. So I'm going to bring a little bit of that down into the water here, directly below, and just let that warm and cool thing happen beside each other. If it doesn't work, well, you get rid of it. But let's see. And I'm going to bring a couple of more little light spots in beside that. Okay, well, that's kind of the general idea. I'm going to go in with my palette knife again, and just for some final sort of big blobs to get this a little more snow-like. By bringing more light in, this brings us into the foreground as well. I could have mixed more of this. I can just take a brush now, clean brush, and just spread that around a little bit more. Now, if you saw the time lapse that I posted on Facebook, that went like 38 seconds worth. I think I took a little longer than what it took to paint this one, but not much. So it's amazing how a time lapse can fit all of this into like 38 seconds. It's crazy. Kind of neat to see. I love watching time lapse of clouds floating by, kind of sped up. A little more definition here. Give me a sense of the stream that goes in. Now, I could fiddle and play with this for a long time, but that's not the point of this whole program. And really, you shouldn't fiddle and play too much when you're painting. Just put it in boldly, just get it done. Because it's that energy that you put into the paint that people pay attention to. Everything we do, every mark we make is something that means something. If you put it in energetically, then it looks more exciting, frankly. Okay. I see someone here from Colombia. That's really neat. I'm going to say Aniela Solarte Mera. Yeah, nice to see you. Fantastic. Colombia. Wow, that's neat. People from all over the world can see this. It's like really nice and so cool, but also a little scary. It's like if you make a big mistake, the whole world knows about it. So that's the world we're living in. When it comes to mistakes, by the way, when it comes to painting, you better be prepared to make lots of mistakes, because that's what painting is. It's not how well you paint, it's how well you fix your mistakes while you're painting, I think. Anyhow, that's just my own philosophy. I have never been a super precise painter. When I say that, as an illustrator, I was trained as an illustrator. We had to paint things very realistically, with an airbrush, for example, or some such thing. But when it comes to paint, it's kind of a different program, because you can really play with it until it's where you want it to be. Sometimes you have to turn a painting against the wall. You don't look at it for a while, and you come back and you see right away what it needs. Okay, I think I've fussed enough with that one. I'd like to start on the other side now. So this was warm light, cool shadow. The next is going to be cool light and warm shadow. And you can see that this has been set up with a warm background. And if this peeks through in certain areas, well, that makes sense when I put light over it. And again, I'm going to work from dark to light. That's just kind of the way to go. So I'm going to turn this palette around in my hand, use the other side. So cool light, warm shadow. Let's get into my warm shadows first. So I'm going to go with my dark areas, just like I did the other one. Okay. And this is going to look very different from that, hopefully. I mean, if they look the same, then that's a problem. So let's see if we can make something work here. And it will look like a different painting, because, I mean, I'm going to use the same composition, but, I don't have to follow exactly what I've done in this first one. You can change the composition as you go. It's just paint. That's all it is. Just paint. Don't stress, don't fuss, don't worry about it. If you don't like it, later on you can paint over it. You can totally cover it. Or if it's oil, you can wipe it right off the board. It's not a problem. And at this stage, again, I'm just want to get the movement of this working. Maybe I'll put a little more of a dark spot in here this time. So it's kind of got like another dark area that might help pull the eye back there. So there's a bit of a stream. Maybe it widens a bit here. And again, I'm using the reference not to be slavishly copying it. I think there's nothing, this isn't a job. Like this, when I say that, you can call it a profession, but it's not a job. It's like you're not building a house. And you're not, doing your accounting. This is where you can make the scene the way you want it to be. So I've got warm shadows. I'm going to go into the tree areas again and just create some structure back here. Learn from the last time, don't make all my shapes the same size. A great exercise for those of you who want to loosen up with your painting, and I know a lot of people, talk about loose. Well, what is that? You can be loose and you can be accurate, but being loose means that you also should have a certain amount of confidence in what you're doing, hopefully. And you want to block the shapes. That's what you want to do. It's not about trying to paint every little detail and slavishly get into, if you have to paint every window in a building, that's a killer. Some people do it, and I'm always impressed when they can do this because it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of time. But if you're going for the spirit of a painting, you don't need to do all that stuff. You really don't. You can just get the feeling of a painting going and again, make it your own, but using the reference as a guide. Nature's a great guide. And of course, it's much easier when you're painting landscapes because nature is very forgiving. We don't go and sort of say, well, that is a particular, well, some people, maybe they know that's a particular tree, but most of us are sort of like, well, that looks pretty, that's nice. And it feels kind of like the nature I know. So you don't have to go crazy getting all the details in exactly the right place. I'm going to create some shadow areas like I did in the other one. So this is, you can see it's a very different feeling, the warmth of this compared to this one over here in the shadows. And I like that this warm color is kind of coming through in places. That's nice. It accents it well. It creates its own value. When I say that, it's darker. It's darker than this color, and it's lighter than that color, but it's still in the warm tones. And these are, in theory, the shadow areas that I'm creating here, because once I put the lights in, that should become self-apparent. Some shadows in underneath the trees, warm shadows. It's cool light, right? Okay, maybe I'll put a bit of a shadow area over here. I don't know if this is going to work. We'll find out. Now this is a much smoother board. So what I don't have going here because of the textures that were underneath, I have to make up for it with brush strokes over here. So that's something to think about. There are lots of ways that you can create texture and interest without having the texture already on your board. You can do that with a palette knife, of course. You can do that by quick brush work. Okay, so this is our cool light. And I'm going to put this in, and this should look nice, hopefully. The formula, this is somewhat formulaic when I say that. It's a formula that is definitely connected to nature and how we see things. So, and the way light works. So when you put these things in, when your colors are working, because there's a right relationship of them, then in theory, your painting should at least set up a sense of what we see in real life. This may end up looking like it's painted by a different person. Every painting you do, this is going to sound crazy, is painted by a different person. And the reason I'm saying that is because every time you do a painting, you've learned more from the last one you did. So you're a different person. You have more knowledge, you have more understanding. And that's why if you paint a lot, over time, those differences show more and more. They're very subtle, of course, at this stage. From day to day, you may not see it. But if you take the paintings you did 5 years ago and have a look at them and ask yourself, am I a different person now? You're a different painter. Maybe you're a different painter, not a different person. Okay, this is kind of fun. Liking the feeling of this so far. Different than the one on the left, for sure. Feel more confident painting this because I know the subject better. There's an excellent exercise I recommend to my students a lot, and that is do the same painting 3 times. The first time, take an hour. Just take 1 hour. Give yourself a limit of time. Set up a timer, literally. And give yourself like a 10-minute break and then get on with the next one and paint that one within half an hour. And once you've taken another 10-minute break, then the last one you paint, you do in 15 minutes. And you will not believe how great that looks. The 15-minute one and the 30-minute one are almost identical, except very often the 15-minute one is so fresh, and because you know your colors already and it looks so good, you also have to edit things down to the bare simplicity, the bare essence. And when you do that, there's a freshness that you get that you don't get any other way, I know. Now, I'm doing something here. I'm bringing white, actually pure white, and mixing it in with the lightest cool light that I have here. And you'll see that just gives another level of value, a lighter value. But because white cools a color and it makes it lighter at the same time, it works in a case like this where you have cool lighting. If I had warm lighting, I'd have to add a little bit of yellow of some kind or a warmer color into it. But this way, because white cools and it's already cool and it lightens, it works in this situation. I think it does. And when I want to soften areas like this, of course it's wet oil, it's nice because you have the chance to do this. I'm going to go into this blob that's in the water and maybe over here as well. And you can see how our eye goes to the light here. It's kind of fun. I haven't used any palette knife on this one yet. Let's just clean it off and let's see what happens. I don't know if it'll do a better job or not, really. It just flattens the color out a little, makes it a little smoother. And again, because it's a smoother surface, it goes on in a little different way. Doesn't pick up all the ridges like the first one. It's kind of fun the way you get these things that happen with a palette knife that take your, well, give you a little detail. And it's kind of accidental detail. And it takes your eye back. Okay, so I need to do something with the water. And again, the water is blue, but as opposed to it being sort of that, well, it's cool light. So I want to have a cooler water feel. So I'm going to go into cobalt blue in this case instead of the manganese. And I want to mix a gray into that cobalt blue so that it has that sense of depth. I'm going to bring this in here into the darks. But what I want to make, I don't want to, I'm supposed to have warm shadow, right? But I'm just bringing a little bit of cool into that so that it's not so out of harmony. Now I can go into my cobalt blue and bring some fresh cobalt blue color into this. Cobalt blue is a beautiful color. It's a great sky color. In this case, I'm going to create some water effect. You can see the warmth that pops through from underneath here in places. And you might be asking yourself, well, you know, this whole thing was about the power of grays, right? Well, all the colors that I'm mixing here, none of them are pure out of the tube. I haven't done that. And so if you think about what grays are, they're anything but a pure color. I think I said it earlier, and I like to think of it that way. If you start punching pure color in anywhere, in a painting like this, it stands out so much, and it looks out of character. It's a very strange thing. Just to show you what I mean, like if I were to just take, let's just say a warm yellow, and I put it here. Well, let's take it a pure. There's CAD yellow. Look how it jumps off that. I mean, that's just insane. So, you know, I know where your eye is looking. When you look at this painting, you're just going to go straight to that. If this was a sailboat, you know, on the ocean, and you wanted to make it stand out, that's something you can do. It's going to take that right out of there. The joy of a palette knife. And, of course, it leaves a little stain of that yellow, which means that your blues are going to turn a little green, which is okay, but now that's muted color. That's a gray. It's a blue, yellow, leaning towards a gray of some kind. So just going to accent some of these areas a little more, bring a little bit more color into these dark areas here. blue. I'm still working with that cobalt blue. There we go. And I think I need some contrast in here. So I'm going to go with quite a light blue here. And just drop this in. Again, if anyone has any questions or any comments, happy to hear. I know this whole process is sort of, it feels intuitive, but there's actually some thinking behind it. I've got cool lights, so I'm going to take a cad yellow light. You could use like a lemon yellow. Sorry, I'm taking the wrong color altogether. I'm supposed to be using. That's too warm. Lemon yellow, by the way, is a cooler yellow than cadmium yellow. But if I really want a very cool yellow, I'm going to go from a yellow ochre with white. So yellow ochre is a cool yellow. It's not intense. It's not what you would use for candlelight. And I'm going to put that up in behind here. Those are those light colors that I had before. Maybe bring a tiny touch of lemon yellow into that. Okay, there we go. And I can even take that yellow ochre and bring it into a few areas where maybe the light picks up a touch. That cool light picks up a touch in the background. As it comes close to that focal area there. And I want to put in a sky. It's a cool sky. So I'm going to put in a cobalt blue for the sky. Cool light, warm shadow, right? So let's just do that. Doing this with a brush. Could do it with a palette knife, but let's just use a brush for now. I want to keep my shapes different. Again, we don't want to have boring shapes. End up with a boring painting. A little bit of sky peeking through here and there. All right. Hopefully you guys are hearing this. I'm working away, and this is supposed to be recording and all of that, so you get to watch it again later on YouTube if you want to. But again, happy to have any comments that lets me know you're live out there, and I'm not just like doing this all on my own without anyone watching. I may have put a few of you to sleep. It's possible. Okay, cool light. Now I'm going to really take some heavy white with just the smallest amount of the cobalt blue in, and I'm going to really punch this into the foreground. Can put it on like icing. It gives me a sense of texture in the foreground. sets this off against the background a little. As I go back, the shapes become smaller. Shapes are smaller as you get back further, larger in the foreground. It's another way of giving that sense of depth. You have more contrast of values in the foreground and less contrast in the background. Smaller shapes, all of those things help add to that sense of depth and perspective. Angelica, thanks. You're alive and not asleep. That's good. For those of you who find my voice like makes you want to go to sleep, you can always mute me and put on some Rammstein in the background, or some heavy metal, or maybe just something a little more lively. But anyhow, thanks for checking in and letting me know, Angelica. I appreciate it. Okay. One thing that's kind of fun, when in doubt with edges, you can always use your finger. Of course, make sure that you clean your hands well afterwards. I never got into the habit of using a glove, and I know a lot of people do, but I really do make sure my hands are clean later. I really wash them well. And I think it's really important that we consider the chemicals that we're working with. Cadmiums and cobalts and so on are very toxic. You definitely don't want to ingest them or leave them on your skin too long. Thanks, Kevin. Nice to see you there. Okay, I want to bring a little more color into those trees in the background. It's they look like they could use a little something. So I'm going to, let's take again the Viridian, and I'm going to neutralize the Viridian with a bit of, when I say neutralize, that's another interesting word to talk about. If you want to create grays, you can do this by using complement colors. So if I use a green and I use a red together, I'll end up with what they call complement colors, which means that they're colors of the opposite side of the color wheel. If you keep a color wheel handy when you're painting, just to remind you, I know them now because I've been doing this a long time, but if you're just starting out and you're just trying to figure out what is a complement color and why do they call it a complement? Well, in some ways it's sort of counterintuitive, because really, when you think of something complementing something else, maybe, you have like a dark jacket and a white shirt, and they complement each other because one stands out against the other. With complement colors, it just means that they're opposite side of the color wheel. And it means that the complement color is the furthest away from the color on either side of the color wheel. So if you have a yellow, for example, a pure yellow, the opposite color is going to be a violet, which is a mix of the other two primaries. So a complement color is either a primary or a secondary color. So if you use a primary color, your secondary color will be if you're using a primary color, your complement will be a secondary color. If you're using a secondary color, your complement color will be a primary color. Hopefully I'm saying all of that right while I'm trying to mix these colors. So I'm using a Viridian with just a little bit of a red in it so that it knocks it back. It neutralizes it. In fact, it creates a gray of sorts. That's what that's doing. But it's a green gray. So if you can think when you're painting grays that they have color in them, it's a gray with some color in them. Think of it that way. That's just an easier way to process this. Paint your painting with grays that have a bit of color in the grays. And that's a really nice way to create a sense of atmosphere and harmony and the things that we see in nature. Now I sort of want to go darker in that tree right there because it worked in the other painting, so why not do it in this one also? And our eye kind of goes to that, and also over here. And I'm going to bring some lighter values in like I did before to create a sense of atmosphere back here so that we have a sense of distance. So our eyes can still go back there. Maybe I want to have something over here also, so we have a sense of depth. Thanks, Angelica. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how different these paintings look depending on the way you set up your color harmonies. They're similar but different. Okay, so one of the things that I like about that painting there, it's a little more cohesive. This one here is a little broken and jumbled. So there's something, I'm going to try this, this could be a complete disaster. It's happened before. There are a few different ways that I can harmonize or bring things together more. One is to take like a big piece of rubber like this and just drag it through the painting. You have to be careful when you do this because you can just end up making everything a real mess. But it's a nice way of pulling things together. It looks like you've been painting on it for months. And it leaves some nice textures. Another thing you can do, and again, I'm doing that very gently. I'm barely touching the surface. Once you do that, of course, you can always go back in and pull up more detail where you want to. That's the joy of oil, at least. So I can go in and take areas that didn't work out so well and just soften them. And you can see what that did to the snow there. Another thing that works, and this is something I've seen another artist do. I'm going to try this, and again, if it works, great, and if it doesn't, well, you know what? It's just paint, right? So what I'm going to do is take a piece of paper towel and very carefully, well, somewhat carefully, scrunch it up and sort of flick it around the surface. And this is kind of fun because it creates these loose effects that, again, you can paint into if you want to later. And I'm going to do it over here, even in the area that I used that squeegee-like thing. And I know this looks rather insane when I'm doing this because it just kind of looks like I'm making a mess. But it brings a cohesive quality to the surface and a sense of, again, color harmony. I'm just going over this whole thing with like a paper towel, now and then get a fresh one when it's starting to look too messy. And just go in to areas. Then again, the nice thing about this is that you can go back and adjust areas where you need to. It's great for getting, especially things in the distance where you want to take things out of focus a bit. Soft areas. It looks like there's a snowstorm starting. Okay, so at this stage, I mean, that I don't mind that. It's sort of, brought things into a different feel. And I'm going to go in and just clean out a few of the little spots that just don't make any sense. Like if it's too light in dark areas or too dark in light areas, I can just go back in with a clean brush. I'm just cleaning it every time I do this and looking after these areas that are too strong when I do that. It's a nice technique, by the way. It's just really fun. I like this kind of stuff that happens back here, these accidental things. It doesn't take a genius to do this. This is just, anybody can do this. And again, with a bit of practice, you can figure out how far you should go or not. And that just gives a little bit more of a texture that feels believable. I can go and soften areas where I need to, keep crisp edges where I want. And that adds kind of a random quality that I really like. All right. Clean those edges up. Okay, so two very different paintings in a lot of ways. I mean, the theme's the same, but the approach is different because of the grays that I used, the color harmonies that I used. Paper towel scumble, Jan. Yeah, that's a great thing to call it. That makes sense. And I'm not going to take these any further at this moment. I mean, I may go into these afterwards and try and do a little more with them to, something you might want to put into a frame. But the whole point of this today was to show you the difference between warm and cool grays, and to talk about grays and the power of grays, and show you that you don't have to have a whack of primary colors to make your paintings work. If your values are right, if they're working, and your drawing is okay, the shapes are working, then really that's all you need. And you can sneak up on the color, as I like to call it, sneaking up on the color where you need to in order to make it cohesive, to pull it off. When you're painting flesh colors, by the way, it's the same. Where you can sneak up on the color that you see on the cheek, for example, or the lips. You don't have to put it all in with raw primary colors coming out of your tube. It's too much to look at. So again, keep it simple. Keep your palette simple. Pre-mix your grays. Pre-mix your colors if you can to make them harmonious. And you'll find that makes a difference in the final look of the harmony of your colors in your paintings. So there it is. What are we, 3:29? Okay, good. That's an hour and a half is long enough to listen to me, for sure. I want to thank all of you who have shown up. Thanks for checking in. Let me just switch up my camera here so I can say a proper goodbye. Again, this is something I've been doing, every Friday for as long as I can when my schedule permits. I'm doing this for free. This is something I hope that, you would pass on to maybe some younger people who can't afford to take art lessons, or, it's just for you. That's fine. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, I'm excited to tell you that I have 50% more subscribers than I had a month ago, which means that I have, 150 subscribers instead of 100. So that's exciting. That's a big number for me. Really happy to be doing this. I'm painting anyhow, and I'm always trying different things, and these exercises are fun. So I'm hoping that you would pass this on to others. If nothing else, send them the link and say, hey, you should, this guy will put you to sleep. So, but sometimes he does a painting that's interesting, and you might learn something. So, I also want to plug the Avenue Road Art School. I teach at the art school, and they have some interesting courses online. So it's the Avenue Road Arts School. That's Arts ARTS School. So when you put that in, you'll find there are a number of teachers that are really know what they're doing. And I'm not just saying that about me. They're all great teachers and nice people. I'm going to be teaching a color course, which is quite comprehensive, I think, in the next term. So if anyone's interested to sign up for that, they're welcome. But again, these are free. Pass them on. And thank you for showing. Really having fun doing this. And every time I do one of these, it seems like more and more people are watching. So that's exciting. And we'll see you next Friday. Be safe. It's a crazy world out there, and we're going to get through it together. So be well. Thank you again. Take care. Bye-bye.